Well, so let's talk about the hearings we heard yesterday. It's a different era, and that era was in the wake of a change in the perspective that both our government and sort of like the conventional wisdom had on monopolies. And like I said, it led up, I think it was in 96, where they rolled back the FinCin laws that had to do with entertainment, and studios could now own the same thing, or I should say networks could own the material that they were producing out in California, in Hollywood. Things have swung back with this administration. So what did we hear yesterday? Maybe like, I'm curious, as to like how serious you think they're going to go at Ticketmaster, both the administration and it's, I guess starting with the Senate hearings. Who was also revealed yesterday? Like, Josh Hawley, everybody was waiting for his like big, sort of populist coming out. And it seems like he wasn't quite as, he didn't quite bring the goods that he sort of like, that people anticipated. Krista, give me your sense of that.
I would say his questioning was very specifically targeted around like the secondary market, essentially, and this data capture. He kept referencing how much data they gather in their secondary market. But I think he clearly was versed in some of the issues of the platform. And I completely agree with you. Not necessarily the populist caring much about the artist at all, really only worried about the fan. But the thing that struck me about this hearing overall is the fact that there was a lot of bipartisan agreement that this whole entire kind of company has gotten away with, and the artists have not been heard really. When they have spoken out, there's been a lot of silencing, and the agreement between the bipartisan support is that we need to do something about it. And that closing off with Klobuchar saying, this isn't really about throwing popcorn, we're really trying to do something here, should at least give the agencies support in whatever comes next.
Mo, from your perspective, like, what is the value of going after one of these monopolies? And I have to say, like, in terms of like Hawley, the way I read that was, when you go after data, what you're also doing is you're sticking to the line that it's big tech is the problem, as opposed to the big part, as opposed, relative to the tech part. Which I'm all in favor of. I'm happy the DOJ is now suing Google, and they should all these companies should be broken into million pieces. But there is a sort of like that flavor is more attractive right now to Republicans. I'm interested in sort of the generic attack on that bigness. Mo, from your sense, what is the value of going after Ticketmaster beyond, obviously, like, it's important that we have music in our society and that artists be able to make a living at it, and that these things are accessible to fans, but the going after this type of monopoly what does it do for other monopolies, I guess?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, the first thing, because there is that pushback, like, oh, they're interested in going after Ticketmaster. What about the supermarket chains? What about hospital monopolies? And I do a lot of work on hospital monopolies. And that's one of the reasons I was really upset. The one thing that really left me disappointed yesterday is that nobody brought up Astroworld. One of the biggest harms inflicted by hospital monopolies is that people die every minute in American hospitals from just sheer neglect. And a lot of that is because there is no, all of the competition has been consolidated out of existence. Now, competition is not going to solve our healthcare problems, but where it doesn't exist, your healthcare is prison-like. I've done a lot of work on rural healthcare, and the case with a lot of Live Nation shows, what I've seen is that post-pandemic, like a lot of institutions, they've been all about understaffing, undertraining, at Astroworld, there was actually a security guard who blew the whistle. He said, "I left early. I left before Travis Scott's show because I didn't."
I'm sorry. Will you tell people about Astroworld, because I'm not sure that people know what you're referring to.
In November 2021, there was a concert that Live Nation put on in conjunction with Travis Scott. Drake was involved in Houston at an abandoned amusement park called Astroworld. And 10 people died, including a 9-year-old child. Hundreds were injured. And the fault, I mean, a lot of fault has been pinned on Travis Scott because he continued to play his set through what, clearly ambulances sort of arriving on the scene. He didn't stop the music. The performance didn't actually stop until 8 people were dead. But Live Nation is the culprit there. I mean, he was on stage. He couldn't necessarily see. I don't really know what it's like to perform before, tens of thousands of people. And it emerged, pretty quickly that Live Nation not only had not appointed an executive producer or a director of concerts, there was really nobody appointed at that concert to a role that would have enabled them to stop the concert. But it had just, dramatically understaffed the event, potentially oversold the tickets, which is also something that they're accused of doing in the Bad Bunny situation in Mexico, where a bunch of thousands of fans got turned away at the door, even though they'd purchased tickets. So they're overbooking like the airplanes. And there was just no crowd control. There was very, very bad security. 6 weeks after Astroworld, a rapper named Drakeo the Ruler got assassinated by literally a mob of 113 people wearing ski masks and red hoodies. Jumped on this guy and stabbed him to death. And he was dead long before the paramedics arrived. So Live Nation is understaffing its events. It's cutting corners. It's really in this environment where we have mass shootings every other week. It's a recipe for disaster. Obviously, the largest, or maybe not so obviously, but the deadliest mass shooting in history also happened at a Live Nation event. That was the Route 91 Fest. So they're cutting corners on security. It's going to cost more lives, and that's an element of this kind of monopoly control that wasn't addressed yesterday. But I think that that sort of brings us, it brings me back to why this kind of thing needs to really be stopped. I hope that I wish that Ted Cruz had actually been there yesterday, because he's been pretty good at hearings on Boeing. I think that that's another thing that I hope that we can get the senators to kind of come to bipartisan, agreement on, is that, monopolies, lack of competition is actually threatens lives.
And we should say, we've followed a lot of the nurses' strikes that have happened over the past couple of years now, and almost to a strike. The primary issue is not pay. It is we need more nurses, because we can't have 20 people. We just had one in New York. We had one. We were following one quite closely up in Worcester. We need more nurses for the amount of patients we have. And you're a nurse, you work in the ER, you can't see 20 patients in an hour. Somebody's gonna die, essentially, if that's the case. And just so that we're clear, can you just the relationship between Ticketmaster and Live Nation? They're essentially one entity.
Yeah, they're the same company. That's something that sort of blows people's mind. And again, Live Nation was Clear Channel. Clear Channel is now iHeartRadio and Live Nation. But all of these entities are very clear. iHeartRadio had the same for a time. They had the same parent company, Liberty Media. You might as well consider the entire entertainment industry one. But no, Live Nation and Ticketmaster have since 2010 been the same company. And before that, they were sort of the same company.
And where does iHeartRadio fit in? Have they been spun off, or are they also part of what's their relationship?
They were spun off. They were bought up by private equity. They were then, they went bankrupt. Like
Sirius XM is still in the picture.
Sirius XM, yeah, but iHeartRadio then was purchased by John Malone's Liberty Media, which also owns 37% of Live Nation. But then Liberty Media is like divested from iHeartRadio. I don't know how close the iHeartRadio Live Nation connection is at this point, but it would be, I think, naive to suggest there's none at all.
So, Krista, what is the solution here? Like, I mean, what authority does the DOJ have, let's say, or, and I guess this would maybe come out in the form of a suit or a threatened suit. And maybe there's legislation, but what authority exists and what policies are on the table to deal with this concentration of power that is just basically running this industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important. Mo and I are both we just sounded very pessimistic about the hearing. I actually think it overall went pretty well. Like, if we had looked at this from 20 years ago, this went very well. The guy, John Edgell, who ran the hearing back in the 90s, he was excited about this one. So I will first lay that out. But in terms of what can be done, it is action from the DOJ. And as American Antitrust Institute, one of the witnesses, said yesterday, this really needs to be a structural separation, which would result from a formal lawsuit from the Department of Justice. It would have to make it past all of the attempts from Live Nation, I'm sure, to get it dismissed and then head to trial. And ultimately, it would be up to a judge. But what a structural separation looks like to me, at least a somewhat successful one, would be separating the concert promotion company, Live Nation, from Ticketmaster, and then also separating their artist management company, Frontline Management, that they bought in 2008, which was an Azoff company, Irving Azoff. And then you also would probably need to put restrictions around their exclusivity, because that is how they have been able to maintain their power thus far. And, they had exclusivity with each other from the 90s onwards before merging. So to invite actual competition and investment in new companies that can innovate and kind of gain market share and to be a competitor, you would need to put guardrails up like that. And I hope the DOJ knows that.
So no buying exclusivity. Like, you can't come in and say, you're only going to deal with Ticketmaster. Here's a kickback in advance. Here's $500,000. Here's $5 million, whatever it is. You can't do that. That you also can't own both the outlet and the sales, or a substantial piece of the artist in the form of being their agent. I mean, we saw this in there was a big writers' strike to this end to break up that relationship between agencies and studios, essentially, who were double dealing and cutting out the interests of the people who are actually providing the content. And we should just also say, just so that we're clear, the hearings, they in themselves are really just sort of like northern stars for the DOJ, right? It's basically just signaling to the DOJ, if you pursue this, you're not going to get blowback from the legislative branch. You're going to have trouble on the courts, obviously, to the extent that you do. And maybe it indicates that maybe, the Senate will, be putting more people on the courts who are going to be more amenable to these type of cases. But really, the primary thing is, you're not going to get a call and get reamed out by a senator who's going to start to apply pressure on you. And it just basically gives like a vague green light for the DOJ. And then the DOJ is pretty clearly already oriented towards dealing with antitrust. And this is just like a sort of a green flag, or whatever color flag, I guess, you get in a car race, saying go forward with it.
In my mind, yeah, for the most part, it's that. There are some legislative changes that they've introduced or thought about introducing, the Boss Act being one of them, and they discussed it briefly, which is just around like ticketing transparency, but that won't get at the deeper harms. And again, as you said, it's more of a green light hearing to say these are the issues that people in the industry are talking about. I'm so glad they had an artist and an independent venue to kind of highlight the things that within the industry people are seeing. And then, yeah, like go forth, please file a lawsuit.
Well,
and to that end, the DOJ, followed up the hearing by immediately filing another lawsuit against Alphabet, the parent of Google, using a lot of the allegations that you saw, and a lot of the material that you saw emerge in the House Antitrust Subcommittee investigation. So, yeah, we're hoping that these wheels start turning in that right direction. It's important to note that the Senate is where the antitrust investigation that Pearl Jam launched went to die. Right, the Senator Phil Gramm, froze the appropriations, or allegedly he claims that this is not the case, or he's claimed that it couldn't have happened that way. But we don't think that the Senate anymore is that ideologically pro-monopoly. So that is definitely an amazing thing.